right. Ken, are the mics on? Oh, they are. Okay, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's now 11:30. I'm going to go ahead and get things started with our pre-commission agenda. For my report, just a couple of things. A quick reminder that we have a joint meeting with the City of Boise tomorrow here at 9. Looking forward to the discussion. It appears to be very heavy on like our side of things, but I promise you there will be joint discussions on all of the topics. Yeah, we collaborated with the city on coming up with that agenda, so looking forward to it. And then on a more somber note, it appears that there's been another crash on 11th and State Street with a pedestrian. So this is obviously the third one that I know of since the beginning of the year that this has happened. And I just want to take some time to like state the obvious that I think this is just even more justification for why we made the right decision to look at a more safe design alternative for State Street and between 8th and 14th, because this is just not adequate. It's clearly unsafe, and I know our team is looking into it and seeing what pieces and parts were at play with this, but I think ultimately, though, the design isn't working. And so, Director, I just have a couple questions about what are some immediate things we can do, and I think one of them is, a scramble type intersection change. What's the timeline that it would take to make that happen?
Madam President, Commissioners, good morning. And again, I do share your concern on every issue that we have here in Ada County. I spoke earlier this morning with our team regarding the opportunity to do a scramble intersection change. That can we do that? Yes. Is it somewhat intensive? Yes. The team will be looking at that quickly. I can't give you the specific time and date at this point as to what those results might be, but one of the things we're going to have to look at is how do we then reconfigure the entire intersection, and then how do we then reconfigure the timing in the grid system if we do it. But then those are all doable things. The other thing that Commissioner Pickering and I talked about earlier was taking a look at the possibility of restricting those left turns. Again, this will be an issue where our team will look into not only the mechanics and science and everything else involved with this, but how does that impact the rest of the grid, and how quickly can we do that and such. I'm not prepared today to say this time, this date, and here's what we can do, but I will be prepared very quickly to come back to all of you and say, here's what we think we can do in this type of time frame, and these will be the impacts going forward. And so we are on it, and I know that our team is looking at this very, very carefully, and I'll keep you posted.
Well, thanks for that. And I would just say that, the impacts are manageable, that whatever would be very manageable. And the restricting of that left turn lane that turning movement seems to be a fairly easy thing to do, and is oftentimes the cause of all of this issue. Miranda, Commissioner Gold, do you have any, this is your district, so I'm wondering if there's any insight or preference that you'd give to this conversation.
Thanks, Madam President, and thanks for bringing this issue up. I'll just echo what you're saying and appreciate the efforts to look at options and what we can do in terms of a scramble or restricting left turns and expediting that and moving it, up as fast as we can.
And Madam President, there may be other options also that we are going to look at the whole thing.
I think that's a great point. And I think as long as you are sharing those options with us expeditiously, I think it's clearly a matter of time before someone else might get hit. And so we really need to act quickly to address this and make it better. Anybody else? Anyway, okay. And then are there any other topics that commissioners would like to bring up at this time? Commissioner Hanson.
Madam President and Director, I noticed that Compass, they must have been listening to our meeting last week, because they are hosting How do you get federal funding? They're having a special speaker from the U.S. Department of Transportation on the new funding strategies, and I'm convinced that some of the things that we're trying to do in the long run, and Emerald comes to mind, particularly in partnership with the city and Department of Transportation, the Idaho State Department of Transportation. This might be. So I'm hoping several people will. I see Justin nodding his head. Yeah, we're going to be there more than just Tom. It's going to be a number of people, so we can take advantage. I think teaming up to get funding. The feds have adopted in the record amount of money they've appropriated for these kinds of things. So looking forward to hearing.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson,
Next Tuesday.
Again, very, very great point. I do want to thank the commission for last week's support on the discussion regarding Emerald. In my conversations afterwards, that was very, very positive. And so I'm hoping that we have the same discussion tomorrow on that very important agenda, because as you all know, if we have three of the major partners saying, let's go get this done, it's going to get done.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, along the lines of what Jim just said about this particular seminar opportunity, Director, would you make a point, our staff make a point of inviting the city of Kuna to attend that? I believe we went way past the ideal opportunity with the last RAISE grant scenario to address a planning grant anyway for the overpass. And that was kind of understandable because of the staffing change they had. Now there's no excuse.
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, yes, we'll personally contact them after today's meeting.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. All right, are there any general housekeeping items or question about today's agenda? Okay, Director.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioners, again, good morning. We have a wide variety of topics as we try to do with all of you, but I'd like to start off first by reintroducing you to chaos. And so with that, I'd like to have Joe come up. He'll brief you on it.
We're talking about his office or what? No.
That's another.
Welcome, Joe.
Madam President, Commissioners, thank you for having me. Chaos, it's a great name. I think hopefully we'll be able to kind of share where we started this and some of the insights on what led us down some of these paths. So to start us off, one of the initiatives this year was to create a team to explore new fleet technologies and automation, identifying what is happening, what is going to happen, and as stated in there, what is science fiction, and plan for those for ACHD fleet and operations. The team that we put together is made up of various people across ACHD, a lot of different backgrounds, some technology buffs, some are not. We want to provide updates on what the technology is that we're looking at, what support it needs, and what must be different in order to adopt it. So CHAOS had a specific acronym: change has advantage over stagnation. We came up with that to create the environment that technology does bring change, and it does have impacts, good and bad. So this team is able to experiment and experience some of these technologies and then share those insights with the rest of the district. So technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. If we remember the first cell phones, everybody had battery anxiety. The advantage was you had your cell phone everywhere. So taking that advantage and then ratifying it and molding it, we were now starting to text message. We weren't communicating over the phone as much, and now we have our mobile banking and whatnot over that phone. So we can't avoid some of these technologies and the impact, but we need to understand what the uses are, and then we can evaluate what that is. So we've asked ACHD staff to really bring ideas to us, provide input, challenge the process. We're trying to include everybody as we go through these. So as we seek understanding of how these technologies work, we need to hypothesize the impact to ACHD. Some of the aspects that we explored in the last 6 months were electric vehicles, use of AI in route planning, semi-autonomous crack sealing, and even self-healing concrete. So pretty broad spectrum there. The one that we really dove into was an electric mini sweeper. It was a traditional sweeper mounted onto an EV chassis. We had the opportunity to also demo this. So not only did we get to hypothesize what we think the impacts would be, we actually got to go through those to some degree. I have a couple pros and cons there. There is a very deep dive into this and how it performed against some of the traditional ones. Some of the things that we did learn that I'd like to point out was we do not have the charging infrastructure currently to support that. The environment has the biggest impact. So you start to measure work differently. Heavy material consumes more energy than light material. So you have to understand those things as we go through it. So we definitely need a pragmatic approach towards the routes or wherever we would want to deploy EV. Operator comfort was astounding. They really liked it. But on the other hand, as all things do, they tend to break. So we do not currently have the knowledge of the systems or the skill set in order to support some of these. So again, we deep dive this. We learned a lot. It was very beneficial to present this during an all staff and really highlight some of the changes that we need to bring to the organization in order to adopt this technology. It's not about whether we're going to purchase this technology or not. This team is really trying to understand what is the technology and what are those impacts. But with that, pretty short. Any questions?
Madam
Commissioners,
President,
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
just a comment. You know, that last part of the slide where it said that technology was 300% more money than what we're using right now, that was pretty much the answer for everything to me. Comfort aside.
Commissioner Hanson? Oh, Commissioner McKinney?
Yeah, if I may, I'm inclined to agree. I think I would like to urge caution in trying to get into EVs, especially in the heavy equipment area, or at least, you know, the industrial type equipment. They haven't quite shown their ability yet. I mean, technology is still growing. In the future, it may get there, but then again, it may not. And I think it would be unwise for us to spend the huge amounts of money to be in that experiment. Let other people experiment and figure out where it's going. Everyone has probably heard recently that the CEO of Toyota Motor Corporation has said EVs, yeah, hold the phone. They're not quite the cure-all that many people think that they are. Maybe someday they will be, but there are still other technologies that are being considered. And you know, we're like in the early days of automobiles. Builders were experimenting with all kinds of different fuels, from alcohol to gasoline to, you know, a whole variety of things. And, you know, we're kind of in another kind of era like that, and let the people who are doing those experiments figure out what works. And then once it can be shown to be cost effective and useful, I would say go, but for now, I would urge caution.
Commissioner Hanson?
Thanks. I appreciate this very much. Yeah, well, we all know, and I'm being sensitive to the fact that old technologies, cheaper right now, new technologies, more expensive, but eventually they cross paths. And if we've invested in a huge amount of old technology, the cost of replacing that then becomes exponential. So finding that sweet spot is what your team is all about, which I really appreciate. I read something just today about the feds giving a $9 million grant to Boise or this area, the state. I didn't read deeply into it because I had to leave, for EV infrastructure. And so this is now the time. It just makes sense. The cities are in the same place to share infrastructure. So, because obviously the infrastructure they have for city vehicles is the same thing we would have. And so the opportunity not to just set up our own system over here, and then the city sets up their stuff, and maybe the school district sets up their stuff, and we figure out how to share that. And VRT, I know, is moving in that direction as well, mostly because there's a huge amount of federal and national incentives and investment. And that's one of the reasons why we're able today to shift away from fossil fuels, because there's been 20, 30 years worth of incentives and investment towards greenhouse gas emission reduction. So I would encourage us to look into partnering as much as possible with the other agencies so that we're not doing it in a silo, that we're doing it together. Because I know a lot of that infrastructure has to be put in the right of way anyway, so we might as well be part of it. We've got a new facility going in Federal Way. I mean, it just makes a whole lot of sense up there at the brand new place over at USTIG in Meridian, that capacity is there going into it. Appreciate that very much, and I really appreciate the fact that you're tracking this so you know that we are at the right place at the right time as those costs shift.
Yeah, Joe, I just have a couple questions for you. So can you explain a little bit as to, was the scope of this like research or evaluation just limited to this one sweeper, and what was your rationale for that versus other types of equipment, and is that coming on deck?
So, Madam President, we elected for the electric sweeper for the purpose that we could get a demo of it and physically be able to use it.
Okay.
In this process, we were also involved with Compass, went to an electric vehicle workshop on infrastructure. We did visit with other entities within the region that have brought on electric vehicles and tried to understand what were some of the impacts that way as well.
Okay. And like, what's any findings from that additional research at all that you're willing
Madam
to share?
President, there's a lot, I think, comes down to the individual organization. It is disruptive, right? It becomes not an internal combustion engine anymore where fuel is available anywhere. I think that was probably the largest challenge that most of them felt.
And I would echo Commissioner Hansen's point, and I know we've talked about it several times, working together with our various jurisdictions on helping maybe enlighten them on where some of those charging stations should be, right, to serve our fleet and their own. But I mean, has the whole like truck conversation, because we don't just have heavy equipment, right, which I understand Commissioner McKinney's point, that might not be really feasible in heavier type jobs as you indicated, right? But for that lighter work, what are some other options that you're currently exploring in terms of the EV piece?
Yeah, so Madam President, I don't know if you're familiar with ConExpo, Construction Expo down in Las Vegas. It took place this year. Electric vehicles was the mainstay. So a lot of the manufacturers are now producing it. As points made earlier, there's a lot of vetting and ratifying of that technology to make it more efficient, more suitable. So I believe it will continue to be a topic.
Okay. Well, and I really do think that, your distinction between the heavy work versus light, that's going to be critical moving forward. But just keep us apprised of what you all are the experts, right? You guys have to work with this equipment and this technology day in and day out. So, we're going to rely on your expertise around what's going to be a worthwhile investment. But obviously we want to have the bigger, holistic North Star view of being mindful of our overall, emissions, air quality, right? Because we do live in an area that has typically bad air quality this time of year, right? So just being mindful of how we're contributing to those emissions and the poor air quality. So, I mean, again, my whole point is just come back to us when you have more information or you go to these other conferences, because that's going to help us make better decisions as well and support you in your justification for why we need certain equipment to be EV or not.
Madam President,
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
I think I'd also like to know if we can dig a little bit deeper on some of the ethical aspects of electric vehicles. I know that for many, many years now, groups have complained long, loud, and consistently about where we buy diamonds. And they use the term blood diamonds to describe where you don't want to buy diamonds from because of the slave labor that's used to mine them. Well, the same thing goes on with lithium. And that's one of the other reasons why I'm not in the least bit excited about pursuing electronic vehicles at the present time, is because for the most part, that particular element comes at the cost of slave labor around the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam President, Commissioners, again, thank you for giving us the thumbs up to continue on the search. As I think Commissioner Hanson and Commissioner Goldthorpe remember, we're not afraid to look into all sorts of different things. Years back, we did try to bring in propane driven light vehicles, such through Ford. Unfortunately, it didn't work too well. We have brought in a hybrid heavy dozer. Didn't work too well. It wasn't the right time. But again, I think what's most important under our banner of accelerate innovation or lose, we should not be afraid of looking at other options, bringing them to you, letting you know what we think we know, and then giving you the opportunity to say, okay, move forward or not. But we're really excited about the chaos process in Jennifer's operation. And I guess I'll mean that in a kind way, right? And such, but it's a really neat thing. Commissioner Pickering already reminded you that tomorrow you have a joint meeting with Boise, and as she did indicate, we are making all the presentations, but I am as confident as she is that there'll be a lot of discussion back and forth on those items. I spent some time this morning with the group that's putting on Meridian Days. I will tell you that they're very appreciative of the support that Ryan and all of our groups are giving to them. It's going to be another great event and such, so if you have the time to be able to go out there, especially for the parade, I think you'll be very, very happy with that. This morning, there was an issue at the intersection of Chinden and Glenwood, and what happened right at rush hour, all the lights went into red flash, and so you can imagine the backup that went all the way up the hill past Cloverdale, trying to get into Boise. The reason I'm telling you this is twofold. Number one, our team was on site very quickly and working the system. I guess one of the control boxes kind of went haywire and such. And what was interesting, I was getting some phone calls as to why we couldn't respond quicker. Well, as you all know, in a traffic jam, we can't levitate above it and drop down. So our vehicles are stuck in the same mess that everybody else was in, but they responded very quickly. They solved the issue. So one of the questions I asked earlier today was, do we have a system at Ada County Highway District that can kind of give a head nod to our operators that something's about to go wrong in those controllers? And so it's sort of like if you drive your car a little too far and that little light comes on and says, you better pull over now or you're going to be walking. I was not surprised, but very impressed to learn that our team is already looking into those sort of warning systems that we might be able to employ in the future, which would give our team maybe a little bit of bigger heads up about when one of those major control boxes was going to fail, or was there going to be something going wrong with the signalization? Again, it goes back to looking for innovation in operations, but I'll keep you posted on where we are on that. But it was a very interesting commute this morning for a lot of folks and stuff. So with that, Commissioners, that's my report. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Director. Any questions? All right, we'll be at ease until noon. Thank you. All right, it's now 12 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Please join us in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Welcome, everyone that's here in person and those joining us online. First order of business is to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. The next order of business is to adopt the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered routine action items unless otherwise noted. The consent agenda is enacted by one motion. There is no separate discussion on items on the consent agenda. If a commissioner or citizen would like, they may request any item be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. If we do not have any of those requests today, I'd be happy to entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Madam President,
Commissioner McKinney.
before we approve the consent agenda, I just have a couple of questions on item number 2, if it's possible to discuss those briefly. Primarily, I'm interested in sort of the cost benefit thinking toward purchasing versus leasing. I know that's the primary issue here. Is there anyone who can address that for us?
Madam President, Commissioners, for the record, Paul Daigle, Chief of Staff. Commissioner McKinney, we do an analysis looking at how much it's going to, what the interest rates are when we lease versus how much it costs to buy. And we go through that pretty extensively with every one of those things. Right now, because of the interest rates, the cost benefit analysis shows us it's cheaper to buy them outright. And then we'll get a lot of money back when we sell them down the road anyway. So we do go through that pretty extensively.
What kind of a life expectancy do we have with this kind of equipment?
The sweepers, I want to say the life expectancy, Joe, help me out.
Well, I think this is a roller.
10 years.
10 years, okay. And so, our budget is like 50,000 something or other in this particular category. So, and that's assuming a lease, I believe, is that correct?
Right.
And so buying instead of leasing, we're looking at 358,000
We'll do a budget adjustment.
or
for it.
so. Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving on to the regular agenda. We have no items on the regular agenda, so we'll roll into public communications. Is there any member of the public that would like to address the commission at this time? Anybody? Okay, well, with that, the meeting is adjourned, and we'll roll right into our post-commission agenda in our work session. Our first item is the Forest Service agreement presentation. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon. My name's Deputy Forest Supervisor on the Boise National Forest. I've got a couple of staff with me.
Welcome.
Engineering.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Yep. And so we want to talk, in the past, we've had an agreement with Ada County Highway Department for log truck hauling as part of some timber sales support, in support of the Bogus Basin Forest Health Project. So that agreement recently expired. We've got a new project proposal up to Clear Creek, so we want to revisit that agreement. And before we go into the specifics on the agreement, I want to talk a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure law. You might be asking yourselves why I want to talk to you about that, but I don't know how in tune you are with that law and what Forest Service, but there's definitely a nexus and connection here with Ada County and what we're being asked to do, right, as part of this this law that was enacted. So I'm going to quickly run through, give you a little background on infrastructure law and what that means for Boise, as well as our community surrounding the Boise National Forest. So, quick agenda for what we're covering. Like I said, the infrastructure law. We'll talk specifically about the Creek, Sinker Creek Boise Ridge project. Talk through that current agreement that we had for the Bogus Basin Forest Health project, and then what changes or requests that we have for you in regard to Sinker Creek. And then touch on some opportunities going forward there. Specific to the infrastructure law, I want to highlight for you, like I said, why am I talking to you about that? And I want to make the case that you should be interested and can ask that we take, some sort of active role or engagement with the Forest Service on this effort. How the Forest Service focused our funding. It's a significant amount of money for the Forest Service. I'll run through the amount of dollars that came to us. Might not seem like a lot to you, but this is kind of historic for the Forest Service to get this kind of funding to focus our effort on certain kind of work. And then where we put investment, and then what our goals are with putting these projects or putting these dollars to use on the ground. And then again, just some opportunities for engagement with not only ACHD, but Ada County. And we do intend on at some point scheduling a briefing session with the Ada County Commissioners who run a presentation. But if you're not familiar, the law was signed on November 15, 2021. It's also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's a $65 billion investment in America's infrastructure, with $5.5 billion come to the United States Forest Service. I've got a list of kind of program areas that money was kind of targeted, or where those dollars were going. You can see reforestation, watersheds, right? There's roads, trails, bridges. Those things outside the box I left them outside the box. There's dollars there, but it's a less significant portion of the money. The big emphasis for the Forest Service is what we're calling our wildfire crisis strategy. And so we're working on wildfire reduction or hazardous fuels reduction, working around our communities at risk. I'll get into a few more details on what that looks like. But we used the Forest Service used a 10-year strategy document. It's our wildfire crisis strategy that was published just prior to the infrastructure law being enacted. And it just really lays out a plan and some of the goals for the Forest Service on reducing wildfire risk to communities, right? It's a huge issue out west in the United States. Most of us can watch the news. You see those stories with these large wildfires that are impacting communities, not only directly by the threat of fire, but smoke and everything else that comes with it. So we tied the funding to the strategy. The agency went through a whole effort of doing some modeling work and identifying where our most at-risk areas are, and tied the strategy to these, what we're calling landscapes. The agency asked National Forest if you felt you were one of these critical areas, within the Forest Service, needing some of this funding to put a proposal together. So 29 proposals were put forward, and the agency selected 10 of those, and the Boise National Forest was one of the initial 10 selected. That was in early 2022. The agency just announced additional 11 landscapes, and again, all these landscapes are in western United States. So it's a really big deal. And Southwest Idaho landscape is what we call our project that was selected. It includes acreage not only on Boise National Forest, but extends up all the way north of McCall. So it includes Payette National Forest acres as well. In total, it's 1.7 million acres within our project area. And it includes 15 of the nation's top 255 priority fire sheds. So again, the agency they looked at a whole number of fuels types, proximity to communities, interaction, the wildland-urban interaction between subdivisions, rural homes, cities, whatever it might be. So they put those all into a model, and they ranked those fire sheds. So Boise National Forest has the number 11th ranked fire shed in the country. So that's kind of a big deal, right? Number 11 out of all fire sheds. I think California, Arizona, Utah, Washington, these big western fire states. Right outside of Boise here is number 11. It's on the Highway 21 corridor. So south of Idaho City is that number 11 fire shed. But again, just to emphasize, we've got 15 of those, and they're various rank. number 11 was our highest here on the Boise. So our project is, again, it was one of the initial 10 that was funded, 1.7 million acres in size. That includes almost 1 million acres of National Forest Service lands, and then we have, leaves about 800,000 non-Forest Service acres, right? So that's state, private, BLM, or other land jurisdictions in there. And what we've been asked to do is put an action plan together to treat 25% of the National Forest Service acres within the Fireshed. For us, that means treat 250,000 acres over the next 5 to 7 years. That's a really big ask, right? That's huge actually for us. So we put this 5-year action plan together. We started in 2022. We got about 17,000 acres treated in that first year. We got the funding late in the fiscal year for us. So we got that in May. Our fiscal year ends at the end of September. So the big effort to get those dollars put into contracts or agreements with different entities. And over the next 5 to 7 years, we need to average around 37,000 acres of treatment a year. You can see that up there. So we're shooting for 30 to 50,000 acres of treatment a year. And then it has the dollar amounts again. First year we were given 17.4 million. We requested 32 million this year. And this is specific dollars designated only for this wild crisis risk reduction work, right? So only the fuels treatment, the hazardous fuels work, that type of work. And just to put that in context, those numbers are all more than our entire operating budget for the Boise on a given year. So we've more than doubled our budget there on the Boise because of this funding. And then for next year, for fiscal year 24, we requested $54 million to complete this work. We're relying on a lot of contract work, right? But obviously we have to increase our pace and scale of the work we're doing. That's kind of why we're here before you today, because we want to revisit some of the specifics in that Sinker Creek agreement that we're going to talk about here shortly. So these are the values, right, that we're trying to protect with this work that we're doing. You can see at the top of the list there for communities, we've got Boise listed. There's an interface there, right with the National Forest, Grimes Creek, Clear Creek, right, where you come down into the city of Boise for private landowners there. So again, there's the connection here to Ada County. But we got Bogus Basin, obviously, Stack Rock, right? We know those are interests for the county here. Boise Ridge Road, Bogus Basin Road, those types of things. But then, we're focused as well on the natural resource protection, right? Watersheds, different wildlife species. You can see the list there. And so our moving forward, right, our focus is going to be developing a strategic plan. We've got folks dedicated on the forest to start working on a more detailed, what we're calling strategic plan. We have an action plan that laid out kind of a course of action over the next 5 to 7 years. Now we're going to get down into more details. This is we've got an area identified as the most critical around that Fireshed number 11, right? That's along Highway 21 on the Boise front. So that's pretty much Sinker Creek across, just north of the foothills, all the way across over to Highway 21. So we've brought a bunch of partners together, landowners, different stakeholders. We will be, we've made a request to Ada County to have someone on as part of this effort. We'll still don't have anyone dedicated from Ada County yet, but we're hoping to find someone that can participate with us so they're more informed on where we're intending to put these projects on the ground and what the needs might be as far as it comes to like road use or road infrastructure use. So there's a lot of, I mentioned the 250,000 acres of treatment on national forest, but we're also being asked to do work on private non-forest service land. So again, there's about 900,000 of those acres in this project area. We're going to be partnering with Idaho Power is going to be a huge participant in this with us. We've got the city of Boise engaged on that Boise Fund effort, right? A bunch of the HOAs, Wilderness Ranch, those types of communities as you go up Highway 21 there. We've got other options to do work in there. You might have heard about the Good Neighbor Authority, but that's given different entities like the state or a county or a tribe to come do work on the national forest. We're, building our workforce, right, trying to hire people to, be able to kind of ramp up our pace and scale of doing work. And then, we'll be looking to highlight some different accomplishments or success stories as we start to get some of this work done. That was a lot, really quick, just trying to be respectful of your time, but I'm gonna hand it over to the district ranger in Mountain Home, Adrian, and she's gonna talk through some of the specifics on the road use agreements.
So this is the map of the Sinker Creek area. You can see that Bogus Basin Ski Resort is highlighted on the map. The private property is theirs, and then the area surrounding that is hash marked slightly to the left is where their special use permit is, and that area was in that original agreement for the road use. All the other hash marks that is going the other direction toward the right is the Sinker Creek project area. And in that Sinker Creek project area, that decision was signed in May of 2021. You can see there that we have just under 6,000 treatment acres planned out of that whole project area of 17,000 acres. We have a variety of mechanical treatments planned, including harvesting with large timber sales, mechanical treatments with mastication, and other things that would reduce the fuels. With that, we want to improve the forest resiliency, reduce those hazards, and then, respond to the insect and disease up there. Quite a bit of the bark beetles, but Douglas fir has the mistletoe, and then we will do some reforestation and planting following those harvest treatments. So in those commercial treatments are going to be planned from 2024 to 2030. And some of those are going to be done through integrated resource contracts. So there could be multiple contractors out there doing work in different places at the same time. As you can see there, it was estimated that there is about 17.1 million board feet of commercial timber, which could equate to 3,400 logging trucks. The preferred route is down the Bogus Basin Road, and that would be approximately 1,000 log trucks to come out that way. Our current agreement that was based on the Bogus Basin Forest Health decision that was signed in 2018, you can see here we have already treated 721 acres with both commercial harvest and non-commercial thinning, and that was an estimated 314 log trucks. We are limited in this agreement to hauling from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. with 5 trips per day, and that's without pilot cars. We don't know if ACHD has experienced any issues with the Bogus Basin transportation and our haul, any known accidents or complaints. But we are asking that with this the Sinker Creek and getting a new agreement, that you consider some conditions that we would like to change, including increasing to 15 trips a day instead of 5, and then modifying that also so that the pilot cars would be up to the 15, so that they didn't have to have those pilot cars. And then requesting the change for the time period, so that we can have more time frame when school is not in session, because we realize that is of concern. So 5 a.m. to 4 p.m. when school is not in session, and then 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. when school is in session.
Madam President?
Yeah, but really quick, I have a clarifying question, because on the slide before you said there were no pilot cars. If they only do 5 trips per day, they don't have to use pilot cars. If the contractors choose to do more than 5 loads per day, they have to use pilot cars. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldberg.
Yes, could you remind us what the rest of the route is for Bogus Basin Road ends at the bottom of the hill? Where were they going past that?
I don't think that mic's working, so you might have to stand up and, yeah.
On in 2018 was Bogus Basin to Hill Road, and then from Hill Road to 36th to Veterans Parkway, Curtis, and the connector. That's the route that was designated through our 2018.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
No changes to that route?
You guys have some thoughts on that route? We presented 3 or 4 the preferred route back in 2018.
I know it did to the commission, but basically for safety reasons.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
So I wanna just confirm, staff looked at that route in 2018, and would we also be looking at this route? Have we looked at this route again and approved that route? Or you don't have to, I mean, is it a thumbs up or a thumbs up, Director? Yeah, I think so. Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead, keep going.
That's actually the end of our requests for the changes to this, new agreement that we would like to put forward. And just wondered if there was any other questions or comments, and if there's any other opportunities that we have to go forward.
Thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner
Madam-
McKinney.
Yes, Madam President, I'm wondering if we can go back to the slide with the map on it. I'm just trying to orient myself and make sure, I know where is the county line outside of this area, or is it just not shown? Where exactly does Ada County end? Is the entirety of this area within Ada County?
No, most of the green is, National Forest System lands, and most of that is on Boise County. The county line is not shown on that map, but you can kind of tell from where the green lands are kind of about roughly where the county line is. There are some lands that are in the National Forest System, but most of them are Boise.
Okay, is the Bogus Basin Ski Resort within Ada County, or is it in Boise County?
It's in Boise County.
Okay,
but
okay, that's,
obviously come from Ada County. And
right.
Ada County has an agreement with Boise County to maintain the Boise County road section.
Okay,
Bogus Basin Road in, Boise County.
okay, all right. That's helpful, thank you.
Madam President,
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
being as that we can't make any decisions at all today, are we going to be scheduling something with staff to discuss this more detail? Thank you.
Commissioner Hanson.
I just wondered if you'd had a chance to talk to the city of Boise. Obviously, since even though this is largely in Boise County, it has to come down through the city of Boise, whether you've raised this with the city. And if their input, we're gonna meet with them tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't think we had a dedicated conversation with them specific to this, but that Boise front effort that I was talking about, right, the bigger context I was trying to while we're asking for the changes. They've been engaged on that Boise front project, so they're familiar with a lot of the projects that we're talking about, Sinker Creek, Clear Creek, right, some of these other efforts that we're doing. But again, it's specific to like, the use of the road and that haul route and these changes. No, we have not talked to the city of Boise specifically that I'm aware.
I would just suggest we do. I think we're getting more and more because the use of the road impacts the land use, and the land use impacts the road. So it would be really important that we work in tandem with what's going on.
Can I add one more piece of context that we talked about mentioning, and neither one of us presented it as part of our slides, but part of the need for this, we've had a lot of issues with getting our timber sales sold here recently on the Boise National Forest. So we're gonna try some different contracting methods. They're called integrated resource service contract. I don't mean anything to you, but for us, it means we're gonna exchange goods for services. So we're gonna basically be offering the wood at a reduced rate, but we get service work done then on the National Forest. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because we'll probably have to have, as opposed to having one particular operator up in Sinker Creek, we might have to have 3 or 4 different timber operators or purchasers doing different types of work, and hauling off different sizes of volume of material. And if we limit it to 5 truckloads, right, that means you're splitting 5 truckloads with potentially 3 different timber purchasers or operators. So we're trying to up the numbers. So if we've got several different operators up there, then we can divvy out, we can go up to 15 trucks, right? And better be able to sustain what we're trying to do here, and again, get that work done in a more rapid pace and scale. Again, what we're trying to do with what the Forest Service is being asked to do as part of the Infrastructure Act here.
Madam President.
Hold on, Commissioner Hanson had a follow-up question.
Yeah, Commissioner Goldthorpe and I were the only two here at the last time we did this agreement. And I have this vague recollection of a discussion of Forest Service roads that they're not adequate, but they do access Highway 55. Has there been an exploration of those as you're looking at the other of actually investing some of these resources into improving those roads, so you actually access a state highway facility, 55, so that you're not using local roads.
Yeah, and I'll let Brett negotiated that last time. Road, so you can speak.
Yeah. There are some alternate routes, and that's, go back to that one slide, but 3,400 logging trucks through this whole project area, where the other 2,400 logging trucks route. So we, and some of these treatments occur, some of it will go through Pine Creek, which ties into State Highway 21. Potentially go over to Harris Creek. We are missing a few, and it's owned by some landowners. So anyway, we still have to work on that. Good haul, and that's why we're only planning on 1,000 logging trucks. And that's all kind of rough numbers. I mean, we picture numbers, so we'll refine that, and usually drops, in fact, the more we refine it and cruise and mark those specific areas.
I just sort of elevate that to the extent that you can use some of these resources that you've got available to improve the access to the state highways 21 and 55, because the pressure on the foothills and protecting the foothills and the neighborhoods along the foothills is just going to continue to grow. And I know there's quite a bit of interest, obviously, in residential development along 55. So knowing where that is, you know, the Eagle is expanding up along 55. So making sure that if we have the opportunities to improve those, whatever negotiations need to take place over private land, because trees will continue to grow, and you'll want to go back in there in future years and continue to do similar sort of forest management, so that if we recognize, to the extent that we have 2 state highways that are available for those sorts of facilities, we're less reliant on needing to use local roads.
There's just a few intersections that tie into the Bogus Basin Road that make it prohibitive to haul back on. As you know, that Bogus Basin Road it's curvy, and some of this old lot next in there is just not to haul a different direction. And I'm sure you'll probably see a lot of private landowners that have also done the same treatments that we're proposing that have hauled down Bogus Basin Road. So you're going to see it not only from us, but you're going to see it from some private landowners that are directly adjacent to the National Forest System lands up there.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, great minds must think alike, Jim. I was just thinking about the discussions that we had concerning hauling the loads, and one of the discussions we had to do with the roads going over to Highway 55, and at 2018 they weren't really able safely to handle the logging trucks, and we had discussed a little bit the fact that these projects might be going forward for a long time, and that they might be increased, you know, similar to what you're here talking about today. And we asked that maybe those roads would be improved between then and whenever the next asks were. And so I'm hoping there's been some improvement. If there has, great. If there hasn't, I'm kind of sad, because that was the single issue that we had to think of addressing to come to the agreement that we had that ended here in the recent past. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that up as a reminder to our staff, and a little bit of education to the newer commissioners. And I'm sure we'll be discussing it more in detail with our staff very soon. One of the things that I probably was most impressed about with the last discussions that we had about the treatments was after we said no the first time that the Forest Service came to us, and then they came back. And that's when we said yes. But one of the reasons that we said yes was because of the amazing disclosure, transparency, honesty, openness, everything that was involved to discuss why the Boise front was in as miserable a shape as it was at that time. And we were grateful for that. Discouraged at how many decades had passed since the problems were were obvious to the service, but the fact that Washington wouldn't allow anything to be done before then was discouraging. And fortunately, there were so many different secretaries of the Interior and political administrations, presidents, and whatever, that nobody could point any fingers to anyone politically about and give them any kind of blame for anything, and that's great, because it certainly is a nonpartisan problem. And so I would like to see you guys be able to do as much as humanly possible within the kinds of safety parameters and constraints that we can develop for along the same reasons that we came to our first agreement. None of that's changed, except there's a lot more people living along those routes. And so that's why we have to have a discussion with our staff to figure out just what, why, when, where, and how. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate the willingness to work with us, right? I think we demonstrated we want to be able to figure out a way forward here. I can't speak, like myself and Adrian are both relatively new to the Boise National Forest. We don't have all the history, but I can say I know we work on the access piece, getting easements across private property owners on a routine basis. And we're not making any excuses when we say we have limited capacity to get those types of things done. Those take a lot of time to negotiate easements and work on private landowners. We do that routinely. I think we've probably taken a look at these specific intersections and some of these different routes that Brett mentioned. And I mentioned all this money, and I said right up front, right, the roads piece was listed above. This effort doesn't come with a lot of money for us to dedicate to road work, unfortunately. We wish it would be different, because we're not the only forest that's being asked to do this, and the access piece and the road work piece is huge, but there's not a lot of money to dump into the roads. So we're trying to balance making the economical contract, right, for both the Forest Service and a potential purchaser, and treating the acres, right. That's for us, the primary objective here is reducing the wildfire risk, and just hope that we can all kind of keep that context and balance in mind, and we can do what we can do when it comes to roads and easements and land. And if you want a more detailed explanation on what we've looked into with the roads, we can probably provide that to you at some point. I don't think we have all the details today, because we'd have to go ask some staff and get a little better picture of what we've done since the last time we met, right? You said 2018, so that's like 5 years ago. I'm sure there's been some conversation and discussion though, but I'm not sure if we're ready to talk about it today, or we really details. But we could, if you want more, you can communicate with us, and we can definitely give you some more detailed information, or a greater in-depth presentation on this whole wildfire crisis strategy as well. I skimmed through that really quickly, but if you want more information, we'd be glad to give that to you at some point.
I have a question for you though. So in 2018, how many loads did we have going down Bogus Basin Road at that time? Total.
Around
Okay.
NFS lands.
And over what period of time?
2019 to 2.
And then what's this time frame for the 1,000 loads? It's for,
like David said, house
pretty,
between 24 and 30.
okay.
Contracts offered at the end of, so purchaser could buy, but then ways of getting the work done, and they typically will have a 5-year contract in place, right? And those can be extended from time to time, just depending on the circumstances. The 5-year, they put out the contract, just get the work done.
Okay, Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, what he's just describing about this kind of agreement and partnership they have with their potential loggers, I don't know if it's unprecedented or not, but it's a huge difference to what we understood in 2018, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, you almost had to beg and plead someone to bid on that, right? It was like you're just about giving it away, and they were hauling it clear to LeGrand.
Well, that's gonna be the same. Several of those sales already, we put them up, we offered them.
Yep.
So we're looking at a different type of contract. Basically, it's good for services. They get the material at a reduced rate, and then we're gonna get some service work done. Different pieces of the ground out rectify those terms in a.
Yeah, and if we wanna make the Boise front look like something we can be proud of, something like this has to happen.
Yep.
And, so it's gonna be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, so I would just say, I want to echo Commissioner Goldthorpe's points, and I don't know if you guys know this, but I was a wildland firefighter, and my folks are gearing up for the season up ahead. So, so I think, you have friends in us and wanting to support the mission of this work. I think we just need to better understand the impact on our roadway infrastructure. Just to be honest, I'm a little concerned about that route, although I don't think there's probably, all routes would be a little bit concerning because there's no perfect solution there. So I would appreciate you guys sending that to our staff and our staff having a greater look at what was proposed last time and the other alternative routes that could be looked at. And then I just want to share too, I think the pilot cars being mandatory is essential. This is too busy of a route now to consider pilot cars not being part of the situation. So I want to say thank you for making that be part of the agreement for this next go around. Yes.
5
Right.
trips per.
Right. And I'm saying it should be regardless. That's what I'm trying to say. Regardless of how many trips we should have pilot cars.
Yeah, so in the last types of contracts we put together, that was basically, we have small timber purchasers who just don't have the economic resources to pay for a pilot car and flagging service. So that was basically cost prohibitive for some of our operators. With these new contract, different, because we could essentially be paying the Forest Service as part of the service contract, could provide the funds for that, but I think we still have kind of the issue, the contractor purchaser needs to go out and find the subcontractor to provide the service, and whether they're gonna be willing to do that or not, we just don't know, right? So again, if what we asked for was trucks and anything beyond that now would be.
Oh, so it's different. Okay, no, yeah, I don't know.
If we need to clarify any of the, and ask us questions, like I said, we're more than willing to, we wanna for us, but yeah, the proposal was 15, bump it up to 15 without pilot cars, and anything above 15 now we'd be asking for pilot car.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that. So, and especially not knowing, because I totally understand there's varying sizes of logging trucks, right? And all of that. I mean, some more definitions around what would, obviously we want to work with your folks and that type of thing, but we need more parameters around what we can expect for these types of loads that would not have pilot cars. But I do want to kind of get us moving along. So, I appreciate any closing thoughts really quickly.
No, like I said, we appreciate the time, and it sounds like there's interest to work with us.
Yes.
So from our perspective, just anything that you need from us, we're more than willing to come talk to you again, or we can informally have staffs work together. That's fine, doesn't matter to me. We're just, again, hoping to get to some resolution in a relatively timely manner. So, yeah, we just ask that you're willing to work with us here in the next month or so to work through this with us.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here.
Yep.
All right. We're going to move along into our pathway policy presentation. Ryan.
Thank you, President Pickering. Commission, for the record, Ryan Head, Deputy Director, Development and Technical Services. Today we're here with an information briefing. Really, this is to kick off the conversation with regards to updating Policy 7200 to include multi-use pathways as a development requirement. What you have in front of you that Stacy's handing out is the draft modifications that staff has prepared and put before you. This took into consideration some of the proposals that Commissioner Hansen was looking at and that he provided for us. But ultimately, we believe what's been drafted here provides the same general concept, taking the full policy section in mind. Just to orient you slightly as you look at this, there are places where there are lines is because we're jumping sections, because this policy would be identified throughout section 7200. Just to give you an idea, process of updating this policy, and this really come out of conversations with regards to our last efforts in looking at policy. We met with you all back in May to talk about what is the existing policy as it relates to pathways, and what is the intent to get and hear from commission. We've drafted this policy based on that feedback. Today it's just an initial draft. The plan is to ask for commission to provide us comments by next Wednesday, and have that written up there here in just a second, so that we can then make any modifications and bring back a final public draft of policy by July 19th. At that point in time, we would open up a public comment period of at least 6 weeks there to take this out to our partners. And then we would come back, review comments with you all, review possible changes, and then bring it forward for a public hearing. Just to give you an idea what that public outreach approach would be, we would have overview meetings of what those changes are with the stakeholder groups. We have 3 groups we've identified really acted by any policy change. That would be first our advisory committees, being our ADA, bike advisory, and pedestrian advisory. These are those targeted at specific modes of transportation. We also have our development/contractors, being our commercial developer advisory committee, as well as some of our industry partners in the BCA and AGC. Lastly, we would meet with all of our partner agencies and the land use agencies, and invite them to provide feedback as well. And then we would have follow-up meetings as there are questions or concerns that are raised in those meetings. So really the intent is to present those, listen, take any comments, questions, and then at the end of that period, we bring that back to you all for consideration of this. These are the comments, here are the proposed edits we would put before you, and you will direct what we bring back to the public hearing. We also would make the public as well aware through social media throughout that process.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay. So just to get into the bones of what are identified in the red lines throughout the policy section, this really is addressing arterials and collectors. We're not putting out the pathway as a local road proposal at this point in time. We do provide a definition of what a multi-use path is, or a sidewalk, and that those are pedestrian facilities, so we can use as well as connect the multi-use path to what Idaho law defines as a side path, just so to make that clarification and tie it back to Idaho law. In this process, we also identified that it incorporates that 10-foot multi-use path, and here we're saying minimum. We recognize that there are situations where there's higher levels of pedestrian or bike traffic that we may want to consider, or the cities may want to consider or recommend something higher than 10 feet. So we did just put in there minimum, just so that there is that option. That would be in lieu of sidewalks and bike lanes, and then it grants staff the discretion to determine, based on the existing conditions, which is the right approach, or which facility is the right require. This is taking into account those situations where you have very small frontage connecting to 2 existing sidewalks, and we want to make sure that it's reasonable and rational policy and incorporates and recognizes that. In situations where there is a pathway required, the proposal reduces the amount of pavement in the street section, recognizing that 5 feet that would have been a bike shifted out in part of that multi-use path, and so giving that benefit back to the development community, that they wouldn't have to build roadway while building the pathways. So some incentive there to want to do that. Additionally, as part of the multi-use path, it would be required that it would have an 8-foot buffer. That buffer is what is the minimum required for street trees. And so taking that into account, we wanted to put in what is the ideal situation here in order to get more of those vertical elements and provide more buffer from the street by having that identified here. Additionally, in this, staff looked at what the master street map preservation widths are and updated the policy to incorporate those. This is increasing some of that preservation width for future capital improvements that will make it possible to accommodate these pathways when built out by a capital project. Additionally, it incorporates the pathway offsets at intersections, being as you approach an intersection, have the pathway jog. This has kind of two purposes. It slows the bike traffic so that there's more awareness. It also creates more visibility for vehicles coming and going. It also puts the bikes and pedestrians in the location that's most visible for the vehicles. It provides guidance for how those pathways would cross a median, meaning if it's a 10-foot pathway coming up to the, also a 10-foot pathway through the median. One other item I didn't list out here, with relationship to meandering sidewalks. Historically, the policy was discouraged. In this case, it would be, what staff is proposing is that we prohibit meandering sidewalks unless there's a site-specific condition that requires it, like a street tree or other types of things, or a tree, a historic large tree or a utility pole or some other thing that makes it that staff and the developer want to identify a solution that with some minor jog there. Lastly, and one of the changes that falls in these sections is establishing a default design speed for collector roadways. In this case, what we're proposing is a default of 25 miles per hour for collector roadways, unless site-specific conditions warrant that, and the traffic engineering supervisor would have the discretion. We are trying to incorporate the idea of decision-making down to the lowest levels, so staff can really look at the conditions and adapt. In cases where you'd want it more at a 30 mile per hour, maybe in more industrial collectors or other types of things that where the context is a little bit more appropriate for different speeds. With that, again, this is before you. We'd love to have comments back from the commission by the 28th, and we make edits and bring that back to you by July 19th before this goes out to the public. With that, I'll stand for any comments or questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate all of the effort that you've been putting into this. Commissioners, thoughts, comments, feedback? Commissioner Hanson.
Just a quick question. Is there a difference between the blue line and the red line?
Actually,
just two different people's edits.
President Pickering, Commissioner Hanson. Actually, the blue are those that were proposed originally by MIG, by our ADA consultant. And so we built off of what they had proposed, and then added in some changes. The red are our staff's identified changes.
Great.
Thank you for that clarification.
And yeah, I'll get you my inputs. I think we're also restricting a few things. I think just referencing this whole notion of a meandering sidewalk. It's like, let's just make it compliant with ADA, because we might inadvertently then require a developer to provide more land or whatever, because we're calling it a meandering. Discouraged was basically treated as prohibited, and now we'll say it's prohibited, and I don't think either of those are necessary. As long as it's a detectable pathway, there should be a lot more flexibility, and I like that there's flexibility. The other, it doesn't deal directly with this, but the language with pathways, but the language is in here regarding the continuous center turn lane. And we might look at, if we're gonna fix that, whether we should fix the issue of continuous, automatically, just by default, putting in a continuous turn lane, even though there's nothing to turn to until for many feet. It's rather than appropriate turning, pockets, might be better. And then the other is to reference physical barriers. It's another thing where my perception is we sort of default to space, requiring a developer or a landowner to give more space when we can also get the pathway to a LTS 1 or 2 if there's a physical barrier there. So, and I know that probably is assumed in the discretion of the engineer, but I think we should say that so that we're not defaulting to all the extra space that is expected to be given or taken if we have to do it on an existing facility, and talk about what's the physical barrier that would be erected that would then reach the LTS. And then the question is, do we reference LTS through this? I know the proposal I suggested was that we do reference LTS, but this doesn't specifically reference our goal on level of traffic stress. So those are just my thoughts. I'm sure I'll have more, and I'll have them to you, as will, I hope, everybody else.
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, if I can just respond quickly to your comment about LTS. Part of the reason we didn't list it out specifically throughout this is because in the section that was before you recently that would update sections just before this, it makes that the default.
Oh, okay.
Is that you would need to meet those standards.
Okay.
And so we felt like that was going to accomplish the same task. However, that won't be back before you until August, but that, assuming that it gets updated and adopted in August, it would be done before we get this done too.
Great,
Thank you, Ryan. So we received a letter from Marissa Keith, talking about basically how we measure, the buffers, and obviously we need to be flexible because we don't know sometimes if there's issues within property, property lines, lots of constraints, right? And being able to be flexible within that and still be able to put in a pathway. But I'm wondering, Ryan, she made a point about if we're gonna minimize, if there's a restraint or there's constraints within the right of way, and instead of making the buffer space smaller, or say the width of the multi-use pathway smaller, that we also consider the width of the actual roadway itself, and that being part of the conversation, rather than automatically just minimizing the buffer space. Is that equation part of your edits in this latest draft? And does this have any impact on how we consider the widths of the roadway?
Madam President, Commission, the edits that are proposed here with respect to the cross sections assume an 11-foot lane.
Okay.
For all lanes. It's basically the number of 11 and then 2 feet on each side for the curb. That's what we're saying is the required roadway cross section. So it minimizes it quite a bit compared to what we've done historically. Could we consider that as an option? We could look at policy options. The staff has some discretion to look at that and explore opportunities. You definitely would want to make sure that it's a larger piece of property where you don't want to have on an arterial roadway where you're doing quick jogs. But we could look at opportunities to incorporate some language to that end.
Because I'm thinking, and I don't know if she's speaking specifically to this, but I think in certain contexts that might be a really helpful conversation, right? We have a lot of schools on arterials. We have lots of community centers that might be, a pathway might be coming into those community centers where we don't have sidewalks or development currently there, and sidewalk gaps. So I think in some contexts that narrowing a width to make room for a safer buffer and pathway might be appropriate. And like I said, I don't think it would work for all solutions, but it could be an important flexible component.
President, could you send us that communique? I don't think we've seen it.
Okay, yes, happy to do that right now. Send it to all of the commissioners this morning. Commissioners, any other questions or thoughts? Okay, well, let's give do you mind pulling up the presentation again and see if we can see the timeline one more time? Just because I want to assign a deadline for when the commission provides some feedback and edits to you, Ryan.
They're a week from today.
Week from today? beautiful, okay. All right, well, you obviously have a better memory. So, great job. All right, well, with that, thank you, Ryan, thanks for your presentation, thanks for your work on this. Put that feather in your cap today. All right, with that, we have a training.
Madam President, as we did last week with, of course, with your concurrence, I think Commissioner Gold can be excused from this. She did a great job. So the four of you, if you could journey into the pre-commission room, our head of HR will meet you there.
Thank you.
Hey, Dave Jorgensen, are you gone yet?